Okay.
And we are live. And I'm going
Hello,
to start the
hello.
webinar.
Hello to the folks who are watching us across social media channels. We are just letting people into the Zoom room now. And hello to those of you who are watching out of Circle. This is the awkward moment at the beginning of a call where we're waiting for everybody to log in. We're killing time a little bit. I invite everyone, as a reminder, we can't see or hear you in this webinar format, but you can communicate with us by dropping a message in the chat. You can go ahead and kick off the chat by dropping your name if you're running for office, what you're running for, and where you're calling from. And I'll just start by saying, I'm Rob from Maine, and I'm with goodparty.org. So feel free to drop where you're calling from in the chat. Also, throughout the call, there's a button that allows you to submit questions, and it'll have a nice, tidy question queue that Chris and I can use, and we'll kind of like weave it in throughout the presentation this evening. We love getting questions. I think some of the best learnings from these calls always come from the questions that you guys ask. We'll hold the full 15 minutes at the end for questions, but I'll try to also insert them in and bounce them off of Chris throughout if there's a natural place in the presentation. But yeah, we're excited to chat with everyone. As you guys know, June to us is really where field starts. And this call is field strategy basics. So it's all about how you build your voter outreach plan because campaigns success typically start with reaching the right people and reaching them in the right way. So I imagine a lot of the folks who are calling in, you're in canvassing mode, you're beginning to get your door-to-door efforts off the ground, you're in texting mode, and if not, you're gearing up for that. And this call is about letting you have a good strategy on all of that. So you'll come away from this call with knowing how to use our tools to build a clear plan for field outreach that fits your race, your resources, and your timeline. We're also going to talk about canvassing techniques that actually work. Our expert this week has done a ton of canvassing on campaigns that I've worked on with him in the past, as well as a number on his own. We're going to get into smart strategies just in general for contacting voters. And with that, and without further ado, I want to introduce our expert. Today, we're thrilled to have Chris Kerr joining us today. Chris is the director of organizing at American Promise and someone who's been working on field campaigns at the candidate level and on ballot initiative races for a really long time. So, Chris, I want to pass the mic to you and let you sort of intro yourself. Also, talk a little bit about American Promise and their mission. And yeah, share some of your field bona fides, and then we'll dive into the presentation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rob. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Chris Kerr. I'm the National Organizing Director with American Promise. I've been doing organizing work for just over 10 years. I've been following the Good Party since 2020 and just so excited to be here with you, and to see the organization to develop over those times. I love what you're doing. I love that you're providing these tools for independent and third-party candidates. As you'll see, I've done a lot of my work around for third-party candidates and independent candidates, and for issues that try to level the playing field for all candidates to be able to run for office. So, a little bit about me. As I said, I've been organizing just over 10 years. I've worked on, I tried to count in my head, I think I'm at 14 campaigns and a lot of little projects in between in that time. So I've been really working one campaign after the next in that time. And a lot of what I've been doing is on electoral reform. I worked with Rob here in 2015 on one of my very first campaigns, which was to strengthen Maine's system of public financing for candidates. So candidates can run for office without having to grovel for money from corporate bigwigs. I was also the field director for two ranked choice voting campaigns in Maine, 2016 and 2018, and we became the first state to pass ranked choice voting for statewide elections. Worked on a successful campaign for open primaries in 2018, and now I'm currently the national organizing director with American Promise. And American Promise has been around since 2017, working to pass a constitutional amendment that will restore our ability to put limits on political spending, essentially looking to overturn Supreme Court rulings like Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United. And we are making great progress. We've already had 23 states sign on, pass some formal resolutions in the state legislature calling for the amendment. Excuse me. We just Utah is our most recent state. They just signed on a couple months ago, and we are currently in another 10 states. So there's a lot of momentum around this issue right now, and American Promise is really capitalizing on that. And then, finally, before I pass it back, I just want to mention that I have also worked on some candidate campaigns, since that's, mostly what we're here to talk about tonight. I was an organizer for Sanders in 2016, traveled the country working for him. When I first heard about the Good Party, I was the campaign manager for a U.S. Senate candidate in Maine, Lisa Savage, and Good Party actually reached out to us to add Lisa to their to the Good Party and utilize their software. And then most recently, I was the treasurer for a third-party presidential candidate in 2024. So yeah, organizing it's really my life. It's not just a profession. It's my life. It's my lifestyle.
Awesome. Well, thrilled to have you, Chris. And as you guys can all tell by that resume, Chris has a ton of experience with taking messages directly to voters and creating voter outreach plans. And so I kind of want to dive right into talking about the foundation of building a voter outreach plan and some of the sort of like math behind creating a really effective plan. But why don't we start with the foundation? Chris, what exactly is a voter outreach plan, and why do so many first-time candidates sometimes skip this or get it wrong entirely?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. A voter outreach plan is exactly what it sounds like. It's a plan that outlines your strategy for directly engaging with voters, persuading them, and ensuring that they actually go out and vote. I come from a business background initially. I went to business school in Maine, and I think of a campaign plan a lot like a business plan. When you start a business, you don't just jump in, start winging it. You've got a business plan, which includes other specific smaller plans like a marketing plan. And then typically we'll have different reports like a break-even analysis, basically how much you need to break even. And to me, a campaign is very similar. You've got a campaign plan that outlines your overall strategy. Within that, you have a field plan that outlines your different methods for outreach, whether it's phone banking, text banking, maybe it's letters to the editor, canvassing, and then how those methods will help you to achieve your overall objective. And I think that candidates will often skip this for three reasons. I would say one, that they're busy, especially third party and independent candidates, candidates running for more local races. It's extremely difficult. It's time consuming. It's a lot of work to run for office. And so even if the person, the candidate or, a small team of people have experience, they may not just have the capacity, the time to really sit down and draft a plan before heading out and starting the campaign. The second reason why someone might skip this process is because they just don't know how. And this again is more common in the independent space, third party space. The major two parties offer a lot of training and resources, and if you operate outside of those parties, you often don't get access to those same tools and training. So. That's another reason why some people might not start with a good plan. And then the third reason is typically money, I think. And so just, even if you want to make a field plan and use the tools, you might not always be able to afford to utilize those tools and to execute the plan. So I think it's understandable that a lot of candidates don't take the time to make a field strategy, but in my opinion, it is that's generally a mistake. Why is it a mistake? I think field programs, they look like total chaos from the outside, but they're actually very precise operations. It takes a ton of planning and organizing to build the capacity that you need and to mobilize people in a way that actually supports your overall mission. I was actually in the last couple of days, I read this study as a recent study by the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and they show through research and data, it's great. I think Good Party would love this, and I love the data that I've seen that y'all have shared too. But I think that data can be so key, and this data was showing that if engaging volunteers early in the cycle and having a well-organized field plan is associated with a much greater level of aggregate activity throughout the campaign. And then through the Good Party, I learned, it's very similar that campaigns without written plans typically underperform by 15 to 20% compared to more organized effort. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm hearing a lot of really good notes there. I'm like, it seems like the biggest mistake that people can make with a field plan is just not doing one. And early in my career, somebody told me if it's not written down, it's not a plan. So when you say, from the business background and the similarities between a business plan and a field plan makes total sense to me. And yeah, another thing that I'm full of idioms, but an idiom that I heard very early on is that field wins campaigns, and it makes the difference. And it makes sense. Up to 60 to 70% of your budget goes into voter contact, and a majority of your voter contact, especially on a local campaign, comes from your field program. So it's a huge part. It really is like the heart of a campaign. But Chris,
Yeah.
I think that there's some math that really grounds the field plan when you're developing it. First of all, there's the win number. Can you talk a little bit about the process of calculating a win number and what research should candidates be looking into as they begin to lay out their field plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was talking about the campaign plan as like a business plan, I see the win number as like the break even analysis, which the break even analysis tells me how much I have to sell to make a profit. A win number tells me how many votes I need to win the election, and achieving that goal is ultimately the goal of the campaign. It's the target that directs all of your activity, and since campaigns have a limited time and resources, the win number can kind of help you to prioritize and target your efforts effectively. The win numbers, essentially, the vote numbers is like the minimum number of votes required to secure victory in that race. In a general election, it's typically going to be like 50% of the total votes cast plus one. But then you've also got to factor in if there are multiple candidates, and you typically want to aim a little higher than just 50% plus one to give yourself a buffer, maybe 52 to 53%. And then also, again, factoring in if you have multiple candidates, if you have four candidates in the race, you only need 25% plus one. In Maine, we have ranked choice voting. So when we calculated the win number for Lisa Savage, it was even more complicated because you had to factor in, with ranked choice voting, you can essentially win with a smaller percentage of first choice votes. So I was trying to do the math in my head yesterday. I think like in a four-person race under ranked choice voting, you could win with as little as 14% of the initial vote, but then you'd have to get like 100% of the second choice votes. Anyway, it was just a fun little math project I was doing yesterday, probably not relevant to this conversation. But so when we did the Lisa Savage campaign, we did a couple of different tracks, considering like if four candidates were in the race until the very end, or if some of the candidates dropped out. Having a couple different potential scenarios, I think was really helpful in that situation. And then to calculate the win number, it's quite easy. I think you want to take the total number of registered voters in the electorate. So say you've got a town with 20,000 registered voters, and then you look at the expected voter turnout. Typically, you want to go back a few elections and take an average. So look at the average expected turnout, and it does change depending on the type of election. So you've got to factor that into a general election presidential year is going to have the highest turnout compared to non-presidential years, odd year elections. You want to factor in, so that say that's like 70% is what you're expecting. 20,000 total voters, 70% expected turnout with two candidates in the race. That means there's 14,000 expected votes. You would need half of that plus one, so 7,000 votes plus one. So I think, for a, yeah, sorry, I was just checking my notes, see if I missed anything. I think I covered that.
Yeah. There's obviously there's a lot to consider with calculating all of these numbers. I'm going to drop in the chat some helpful formulas that hit on some of what Chris talked about. So the main thing here is to figure out the expected votes. You look at the number of registered voters, and like Chris said, the expected turnout, which you can usually calculate based on historical trends. In elections like yours, what's the average of the last three is usually a good, pretty much rule of thumb. And so you would compare the last three presidential elections if you're running in a presidential election. And then to Chris's point, the win number is usually 50 plus one. It could be different if it's a multi-member race or a ranked choice voting race, and you provide a buffer. Usually you want to get 52, 53%. And if you're unsure of turnout, you increase that buffer even more so if you think that there might be some interesting pieces here. And I see the comment about star voting, approval voting. All these are really great systems that improve on first past the post. We talk about ranked choice voting a lot. I think because Chris and I are from Maine and we worked on those efforts, but big fan of all of these different voting systems. And then I think the other two important things to think about are like your base voters. So these are the voters that you expect to vote with you, your initial supporters. And it's a little bit harder for independents sometimes to decide who those voters are going to be. And your vote deficit, the persuadable number, are there, the turnout number minus the people who you know or who you're assuming are with you. And that is the core of who your field program or your persuadable program is meant to be able to reach out to. We at goodparty.org, when you sign up for our tools, one of the first things that we do for all of our pro candidates is we actually create a path to victory report that does this math for you. But I do like to provide the equation that we use for some of this, just for folks to be able to use. Chris, to kind of talk about from numbers to action, let's talk about voter contacts, how many times you need to reach people in order to actually change their mind or get them to vote for you. Let's say a candidate knows that they need 2,500 votes to win. How do they translate that into actual voter contacts? What's your advice or formula, any rules of thumb that you have around that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a number of factors at play here. First, you do want to make sure that your total number of contacts really far exceeds the vote number. You got to keep in mind that not everyone who says that they will support you is actually going to support you. Some won't actually show up to the polls, and then you may need to be contacting the same person multiple times to get them from, not knowing who you are to on the fence to lean support to strong support. When I was running the last Canvas operation I did was probably 4 years ago. At that time, we were aiming to have 3 conversations with every voter. So one for the initial contact to ID their support level, then the next one for persuasion to move them up the ladder, and then a final one to get out the vote. But for certain races, you could even do 4 or 5 contacts if you have the capacity. With ranked choice voting, we had a massive Canvas operation, and we were hitting people 4 to 5 times throughout that. It was over a year, so it's not your typical Canvas operation. But I think really thinking about it, we use a 1 to 5 scale where 1 is strong opposed, 5 is strong support, and your goal is to, through a series of conversations, you're not going to move someone from a 5 to a 1, but your goal is to move them from a 3 to a 2 or a 4 to a 3, move them up one, but then you've got to have multiple conversations to get them to a point where you can really rely on their support and make sure that they are, in fact, going to turn out to vote.
Yeah.
So,
When you say move somebody from like a 3 to a 2, can you just like define that five way rating system that we use at the doors?
yeah. So a 5 for us, and I can't remember if it's like how, you can kind of flip the numbers, but essentially a 5 is a strong oppose, a 4 is a lean oppose, a 3 is neutral, a 2 is a lean support, and a 1 is a strong support. So it's a scale. And as I said, you're likely not going to move someone in one conversation from being strongly opposed to being strongly in support. So you really should think about it as trying to move them up one notch, and that can really help to frame your approach in your conversation.
Awesome. You mentioned, so like the golden rule here is to touch people, 3 to 5 times with contacts. And you touched on this a little bit, but does this vary by race to race, in a city council race versus a school board race or a statewide sort of a race? How would you adjust this?
Yeah, totally. It also, I think it depends on a number of factors, but certainly if you're looking at like a school board race versus a city council race, you're going to factor in voter turnout. Turnout on a school board race is going to be 20 to 30% lower than a city council race. People probably are less interested in the race. I think you may with school board races, people aren't, if they don't have kids, if they're it's just a much smaller gets less coverage, so people are less familiar with it and tend to be less interested in it. And then you can vary too by rural versus more urban areas. That can actually play a huge difference in how well you're able to reach people. With rural areas, the houses can be spaced apart, take a long time in between doors. Also, though I do find that people actually answer the door at a higher rate in rural areas compared to cities. But then cities have their challenges too, like trying to get in. I had one turf where half of my contacts were in one building and I couldn't get in the building. So it comes with its own challenges there as well. But yeah, that's why we plan ahead. That's why we have our field plan in place early on in the campaign so that we can anticipate these kind of issues and plan around them.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about timing of all of this. I think most of the folks who are on the call with us today have elections in November. How far out from election day do you feel like candidates should have their field strategy locked in? And any sort of warnings on waiting too long to do so?
Yeah. So as a general rule of thumb, when I am running a campaign, if it's a federal race, congressional race, I'm looking to start a year out. You probably don't have your field plan developed at that point, but you at least want to get started, start developing the campaign plan. And then by, the spring, you're going to want to have your field plan in place. I like utilizing fairs and festivals as a way to reach voters. And if you're going to do those, you need to have applications in, usually March, April. So you want to have a field plan laid out by then. For state races, state house, state senate, or even city council races, would be thinking more about like having the plan in place by the end of June so that you can start doing your one-on-ones and reaching out to volunteers in July and August. And then for like the hyper local races like school board, you may not really need to start until September. I think in general, like a good rule of thumb is July, August is a good time to make sure that you're locked in. I did see a statistic from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government study I was mentioning earlier, where if you are having your first one-on-ones in July, you have a greater chance. It's basically increases the number of volunteers that you can get to participate in GOTV and increase the number of overall shifts that were scheduled throughout the life of the campaign.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I hadn't heard that. That's a good little factoid to find.
I'll have to send you the study. It's great. There's some good
Yeah,
stuff.
I'd love to geek out on that study. Can you walk us through a little bit of what a typical field timeline looks like? So you've got really starting with those one-on-one contacts, like you said, in
Mhm.
July. So June is really the time to like start ramping up. July, you start executing. You mentioned the fairs and the the pieces around all the summer opportunities for outreach. How does that sort of ramp up into the end of the campaign and get out the vote?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, just painting with broad strokes here when I'm doing a campaign. In Maine, uh, harsh winters, so that's a factor. If you're starting early, if you're doing a federal race and you're starting a year out, then over the winter, I'm looking to build coalition partners, reach out to other orgs, reach out to the people I know who I can turn into strong supporters and maybe doing some presentations in places where they're warm. You can go out and set up your own presentation in a library, invite the local community, and do it very cheap. Then, looking to when spring hits to start those fair applications. And then also I find that the farmers markets and other outdoor activities in the spring can be very productive as people are like just getting out from a long winter. They tend to be in a very good mood on that first sunny day. So you catch them in a good mood, they're more likely to talk with you, sign your petition, support your cause. Going to want to, like we said, have your field plan pretty well laid out by the end of June so that you can start to be systematically contacting volunteers by July. Typically, when I ran, when I was working with Sanders, they would just drop you in a city with your laptop and that was it, and you had to find housing, you had to find an office, you had to start, all they gave you was a list, which really to me solidified in my mind how important data was. Like, this is the tool that they gave us, a CRM and the data, and from that we were able to find supporter housing, we were able to find people to bring food into the office, data entry, office management, canvassing, phone banking. So yeah, I want to be having those conversations by July, no later, and gauging people's interests and starting to find those people who can be leaders on the campaign. I know that I'm unlikely to be able to contact. Unable to contact everyone on the list, so I'm going to contact a few people and turn them into leaders, turn those into organizers, and develop them so that we can see exponential growth. And then um, and yeah, then the first round of outreach, like I said, is typically going to be a voter ID. You'll have your list, your voter file, who you plan to contact. Start by IDing their support, then to a round of persuasion canvassing by, let's say, September, maybe late August into September, October. You're doing persuasion canvassing to move people up that support ladder. And then finally, a round of get out the vote. And you want to be planning get out the vote early. I start recruiting get out the vote shifts 3 months in advance. So that by the time, when I'm 2 weeks out, I already have 50 people who express an interest in participating. But certainly with a few weeks to go, you really want to be recruiting as much help as possible for that final push. And then in the final, I think it was 5 days usually is what we would do of strictly get out the vote, making sure people know where their polling place is. And at this point, you're only contacting the people who you've identified as supporters. And then just quickly wanted to address Kimberly's comment. Great points that people are sharing here to add to the conversation. Farmers markets are not always allowed, even in Maine. They're not. Some are sort of private. They're done within specific buildings, and they do reserve the right to ask you to leave. So there's probably 50 different farmers markets in Maine. I've canvassed that maybe 25 and half of them have kicked me out. So it's sort of just par for the course with this kind of work. You don't want to be obnoxious or like invasive or anything, but oftentimes if you ask for permission or if you go and you're not disruptive, they'll let you kind of hang out and do your thing.
Yeah, and especially if you find places that are in public spaces, like
Yeah.
here in just close to where I live in Portland, there's a regular farmers market, and that's one where you're always allowed to do political canvassing because it's in a public park, and those public places are defended as free speech spaces. Like Chris said, in some indoor areas where they're held, it's a little bit harder. But to kind of reflect back some of what I'm hearing, it sounds like in the summertime, it's a good time to begin to kind of like really focus on voter contact, getting the name out, raising general awareness. As you transition into late summer and fall, that's when you're really heavily focused on persuasion. And then from the time early voting starts until the end of the election, you're in get out the vote mode. And that's sort of the life cycle that we are kind of just beginning to get into now with this time of year. I do want to lift up a couple more questions. And we had close to 20 questions submitted ahead of time from people as they were signing up for this. So I want to lift up a couple of those as well as some from the chat. First of all, we had the question from Sam Bowen. How do I stand out in a crowded field of candidates when it comes to voter outreach, right? So this time of year, everybody's announcing that they're running, everybody's getting out there. Do you have any tips for separating yourself from the field?
It's a great question. I mean, for one, I think just having a field program sets you aside from a lot of candidates nowadays. I see most candidates lean very heavily into comms and digital organizing, and some have no organizing projects at all. That's just strictly advertising and fundraising. So really dedicating yourself to being a people led campaign, a grassroots campaign, people who are directly talking with voters, finding out what issues impact people and working towards solutions for those issues. Um, hmm how else can you stick out? I think, being authentic too. Like we are at a point politically, this really important point where people are very distrustful. There's a lot of division, and a lot of, what we see in the work to get money out of politics is that people are so fed up with the pay to play political systems. Like 80% of voters now that want something done about money in our elections, and it creates this atmosphere of distrust, especially of candidates. And so I think not taking money, committing yourself to not taking like dark money, big money, corporate money, committing yourself to a people powered campaign and one that will be doing direct voter outreach. I think those two things can make a big difference.
I think that one of the most fun things about being a field person as well is that there's a level of creativity that we're allowed to express in the events that we have. I know when you're doing a lot of your ranked choice voting work, one of the best ways to teach people about ranked choice voting was to get them to use it. So the field program was built around things like using ranked choice voting to decide what the best beer at a brewery was or what the best pizza was and that sort of thing. And on the election side, I've seen a lot of really great events where candidates for their field event have done like trash pickups, so they did something of service for the community that raised their visibility, that gave them the chance to be able to talk with other people and get their message out. So creativity, I think, is an opportunity to be expressed. I think field events that have music and that have food. Like I work for an organization called Good Party, and there's nothing I love more than a good party. And to me, a good party is something that has food and music and fun. So that to me is a huge part of how you can stand out.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you said that, and I was thinking it too, and Yeah, that creativity, having fun, it is infectious. And I worked with like a small group of people who wanted to volunteer on the Lisa Savage campaign in 2020, and they swore by these animal onesies, these like ridiculous outfits, and they're like, you just got to try it. And so our field director at the time bought a lobster onesie and went around talking to people. And it's amazing how disarming it is. Like people thought it was hilarious, and that allowed them to make a legitimate connection and then have a conversation with the person. So I love that idea. I think, yeah, having fun is it's contagious.
So we had some questions both in the chat and also from folks who had submitted questions ahead of time about like ways to utilize volunteers. And Casey asks, can you talk about turning volunteer leads into proxies, so people who can take your message into private spaces, especially like that is one of the ways that we get around not being able to get into an apartment building. For example, if you have a tenant who lives there who's willing to go leafleting or door knocking for you, that's the way to get over that. But what's your advice for recruiting volunteers to act as a proxy for you and bring your message to others?
It's so important, and it's why one of the reasons why having a good field plan is so important, because that the scaling a field operation it's challenging, and you've got to follow a particular strategy in order to make it happen. I've learned a lot, or I've heard a lot about the snowflake model. I think that might have been a Marshall Gantz or Hari Khan, but essentially, you're in the center, or your core group of organizers are in the center of the snowflake, and then you branch out to reach, 10 super volunteers, and then they each reach out to 10, and it grows and grows exponentially. And that is really the only way that a grassroots field campaign can scale. Um, So I lost my train of thought there.
I
Oh,
think you brought the train into the station there. You're talking
yeah,
about how to make people into proxies for you, and you gave some
yes.
really good
Yeah,
advice
yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
Um,
And
another,
one other thing on that, Russ, real quick,
yeah.
thanks for getting me back on track. Is like I start to look for leaders right from the beginning. I'm looking for people that show interest in the work, who are capable, who don't complain, who are willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work, and are not like, joining and then bossing people around on the first day. So I'm really looking to identify positive traits in people, leadership traits, and then immediately start working with them to move them up a ladder of engagement. And that's a really important part of the organizing, is like start with some really basic tasks that people can do, that anyone can do, and then have progressively harder tasks, all of course that work towards furthering your overall objective, but things that require more skill, more knowledge, and more leadership, and then move that person up into harder and harder tasks until they're essentially doing your job. And if you can train, 10 of you, they can go out and again, continue to train more people.
Awesome. So I saw a question from Brad Sharp who asked, is digital strategy overtaking in-person strategies like door knocking, meet and greets, etc.? And I'm actually going to use this to kind of pivot into the next section that we have. I'm a big believer that the person who, especially at the local level, who knocks the most doors has a higher likelihood of winning. And we've seen that across all goodparty.org races. People who knock on every door in their district 2 times or 3 times tend to win their campaigns. Digital campaigning is important. And I even think that if I could only do 2 things on a local campaign, I would recommend coming up with a plan to knock every single door and try to put together a smart meta ad strategy. And we ran a training a couple of weeks ago that I'm dropping the link to in the chat, all about how to do a digital campaign strategy. And I think for local city council, mayoral races especially, if you can hit the sweet spot of knocking every door and outspending your opponent on a modest meta ad campaign, you've got a winning strategy for almost any local race. But I want to focus in on door knocking because it truly is, if I could only do one thing, door knocking would be it. That big enough of a believer in it. And I think the thing that stops candidates from doing it or doing enough of it is, honestly, it can be terrifying to go knocking on doors. There are people who have never done it. It is an unnatural thing to go to a stranger and, pour your heart out to them. Um, it's easy to be afraid of looking foolish. And Chris, I know you've knocked just as many doors as I have. So what advice do you give to candidates who need to get over that initial hump to be able to get out there and use this really critical strategy for winning a campaign?
Yeah, it's a good question. I personally I love canvassing, but I know a lot of people get nervous when they first start canvassing. I prefer door knocking over literally every other type of outreach, and I've done a lot of different methods: door knocking, phone banking, text banking, street canvassing, tabling. But out of all those, I just find that the door-to-door canvassing is for a number of reasons is just more effective. The conversations you have are the best quality out of all of them. People are more comfortable when they're standing on their doorstep. They're less guarded. And so yeah, personally, I love door knocking. I mean, part of the reason that I love door knocking is because I've done so much of it. The first campaign I ever worked on was I worked for a group doing door-to-door fundraising, and like maybe 1 in 10 people on your list were already a member of the org, but most of them had never heard of us before. So it's essentially like cold door knocking for money, and you had a quota and everything. It was brutal. It was really like a sink or swim kind of thing. And so I learned to be okay with it, to have fun with it. And so I think I overcame my anxiety by just doing it. Um, yeah, but I think that, for someone who's not going to go out and make this their full-time job for 6 months, there are a couple of ways that you can kind of address that. I think preparation is first and foremost a great way to overcome that anxiety. If you're going out and you're not familiar with the talking points, or don't have the information you need, of course you're going to be anxious. So try to have a firm grasp on the issues, on the area. If you're working for a candidate, make sure you know about the candidate and can answer questions about them. All that can really, really help you feel more comfortable out at the doors. Then practice too. It's not just enough to like have the information, but to be able to recite it in a clear and effective way. So have friends, work with friends to do like role plays, practice out loud. If you're trying to get familiar with a script, don't just read it in your head, read it out loud, even record yourself and watch it back. So that practice can really help you feel a lot more comfortable at the door. Definitely pair up. Canvassing, I think we may talk about this more as we go, but for like safety reasons is important, but it also just makes a huge difference in your anxiety level. It's a lot easier to go out with a second person, especially if they're just as familiar or more familiar with the issue, and you can kind of build a good rapport depending on the person is, which can just it creates a little bit better atmosphere at the door. And then I think in terms of addressing the anxiety, like perspective is really important. And by the way, this is an accident, but all four of these start with P. So I'm going to call these the 4 Ps: the preparation, practice, pairing up, and perspective. It's never as bad as it seems like it's going to be. I might get super anxious before going out on turf for a few hours, but I have never had an experience that made me want to never knock doors before. Occasionally you get a bad door, but the good doors, one good door will easily wipe out, 100 bad doors. So I think, always looking to make that connection. If I have a bad experience, I'm moving on to find that good connection. Um, and you get to spend a bunch of time outside. You don't actually talk to that many people. I mean, most people are not going to answer their door. And like I said, one good conversation can just make your whole make the whole experience so meaningful.
Yeah. And when should candidates start canvassing? Is there such a thing as too early or too late when it comes to canvassing?
I do think there is. I think so like, in the US, we have a very long political cycle. Most countries don't have a cycle that is that long. There's just tons of money poured into it. So you get constant ads and text messages and phone calls, robocalls as you get closer to the election. And this is exhausting. It's frustrating for Americans if their PO box filled with junk mailers and their inbox full of robocalls. So I do think as you get closer to the election, people tend to get a little frustrated. But just in general, because that is how we do elections in the US, like people don't want you coming up to their door too early either, because they're like, oh, we're going to have to be dealing with this for the next, 8 months. Do you really have to be here now? Like, can't you wait until September? So yeah, I think like we mentioned before, starting in June, July with your field operation, and then really ramping up in August, September. I've had people tell me in Maine you don't do any of that until after Labor Day. That was like historically the marker. I think that is sort of faded with modern politics. So like, I think the sweet spot is like 12 to 16 weeks. I've seen that from a few different orgs. That puts you, like end of July, beginning of August. And then, of course, you're going to plan to really heat up, really scale things in those final weeks right before Election Day.
Yeah, and I saw a handful of questions, one from Al Rojas about how do you create walking lists, and Audrey Colvin asked, how do you prioritize which areas to canvas first, which all kind of boils down to not all doors are created equal, right?
Mm.
So how should candidates prioritize which neighborhoods or voter segments they should be canvassing first or targeting with their door knocks? I'm a big fan of the 2-1-1 rule. I imagine you have your own rules for this, but can you talk about targeting different voter segments and the way that you approach cutting up turf?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as we've discussed, data is such an important part of any campaign. Data is one of, if not the biggest commodity in today's world. It's data is being collected on us constantly. It's it's very invasive, frankly, but that data is utilized by political groups like L2 and Murmuration. They take voter data, they append all this extra information to it, and then groups can use that data to target people with their messaging, with their outreach. So, all that to say that when you're creating a knock list, you can use that data to prioritize the people who are the most likely to support your cause, the most likely to answer the door, the most likely to volunteer or donate. And there are a number of ways that I typically prioritize my list. I do look first at first super voters. So I think that's part of the 2-1-1 rule. And each group can, I think super voter tends to be defined a little differently by different groups, but essentially it's the people who are the most likely to actually show up and vote. So maybe the people who have voted in each of the last four elections, or, the most recent elections, or if it's, you might also be looking at people who participated in primaries, which typically have a lower turnout, though when we are working with independents and third parties, that isn't always relevant. But yeah, so I'm looking first for the people who are most likely to actually turn out and vote. Then I might be looking at narrowing the list by things like geographic area, political affiliation or political leaning. And then, one of the things I use the most, frankly, is within these systems like Murmuration, you now have support scores that will basically take all the data that they've collected and put them into a usable metric. So, for example, at American Promise, we use the campaign finance score, which is like a 0 to 1. A 1 means that they are undoubtedly supportive of campaign finance reform, 0 being strongly opposed. So taking the people who are in the 90 plus percentile of the campaign finance score can help me get a list of people who are most likely to support the issue. And then you're taking the group of people that are the most likely to vote, and the narrowing it by the group of people who are most likely to support your issue to get that first group of people. And of course, you want to target these folks first because it's the biggest bang for your buck. You're likely to also get volunteers and donations out of it, which allows you to scale so you can reach the rest of the list.
Yeah, we at goodparty.org, we supply the voter file. It's a part of the Good Party Pro offerings that we have. And we also have a lot of the scores for turnout for all sorts of different pieces of data. And we'll get to the product demo kind of later in the call. But one of the really useful things is we suggest different universes to you that you can use for different types of canvassing, phone calling, texting, et cetera, based on those same exact scores. But I want to zoom in on the actual conversation. What does an effective door interaction look like? How long should candidates spend at each door? And what does the elevator pitch for why door-to-door canvassing still matters look like?
Yeah, this part is so important, and I think it's something that often gets overlooked. Being a good conversationalist is a skill, and as I've learned, not everyone has that skill. It's something that needs to be developed, and so yeah, that's why I like to do a lot of training. I do a thorough training at the beginning of every canvassing and try to have role plays so people can practice those conversations and also to just like encourage people if they're going to be canvassing regularly to just practice having conversations with people about politics, whether it's at the grocery store, you're waiting in line for your gas, talking with your family, all that preparation can make a big difference. But in terms of, when I was training people for door-to-door canvassing, my goal at the door was usually to be as friendly as possible and try to make a real connection with the person. I don't come from a political background. My family was not political. I knew very little about politics when I got involved in it. I got involved in politics because it's like personal reasons, had some struggles in my 20s and came out of that wanting to make a difference. And I also was an environmentalist, sort of a hippie environmentalist, and wanted to, explore how I could make a difference in that realm. And that's how I got involved in politics. But when I started, I knew very little. And so like door to door canvassing was extremely anxiety provoking, knowing I could easily be asked a question that I have no clue how to answer. And then I've got to decide whether I try to make up an answer or look like uneducated. And of course, you never want to make up, never want to make up an answer. So I leaned on just being as friendly and making a personal connection with people. And then as I went, I found like that's what most people want anyway. Like most people are not looking to get into a detailed, thorough political conversation about theory and policy. Most people are not going to even bring up things like universal health care or overturning Citizens United, like those specific policies. I found most people had were much more locally focused. They wanted the potholes fixed on their road and issues like that. I think maybe that's changed in the last couple of years with the political climate. But I'll just say that I think one of the really important parts is to make that connection with someone and to listen to them. Like some people just want to vent too, and they're frustrated with the system. And if you can go in there and be a listening listening ear, you're building a connection with that person, but you're also collecting information. What does this person care about? What issues do they support or oppose? Um, and then I try to make that connection. I ask questions, like I said, I want to find out about them, what their concerns are, what their interests are, and then I try to tie my issue to those concerns. So just very gently too. I'm not trying to beat them over the head with the organization or the candidate. That never works. It's like people have to come to their conclusions on their own. And so what I'm trying to do is to build trust and credibility. I'm trying to show you that I am a caring person, that I'm not, here to try to scam you or trick you into something, and that, yeah, and that I have integrity to try to advance these. And then in terms of like how, the one of the questions, she was like, how long should you usually spend at the door? So I do try to stick to 2 to 3 minutes, but that can be very challenging. Some people will be eager to get you off the porch, and that's great. You can get out of there, get your message, and move on. But then there will be occasionally people who just really want to talk. And this was like one of my biggest challenges at the door because I don't like cutting people off. I am like, like just try to be super nice, and then if they'll just continue to talk. Some people, I think they're just maybe lonely, older folks who don't get a lot of visitors, and so they would take the opportunity to talk to me. And then I would feel guilty because like I've interrupted your day, and now I'm trying to get away from you because I got to move on. But it is really important if you think about, the time, like if you could reach, 5 to 10 people per hour, and someone keeps you at their door for an hour, a half hour, right? You've lost five contacts that you could have, five other supporters that you could have contacted in that time. So I'll usually just say something nice, something polite, like this has been such a pleasure talking to you, but I actually have to finish this list before I can wrap up for the day, so I have to get going. And most people will understand there.
Mhm. Yeah, and that can be a tricky thing because you want to be able to stay with voters for as long as it takes to earn their vote, but you also it's a numbers game at the end of the day. You need to talk to as many people as you possibly can. Lupe, I see your question in the chat here. Can we identify mail-in voters? I realized this last election that those are the people most likely to vote early, and you absolutely can. Most voter files will tell you if someone has requested a mail-in ballot or not, or if they're on a ongoing absentee list, if the state has one. So that's definitely available. Chris, I want to jump into talking about how to maximize efficiency at the doors. From a logistics standpoint, is there an optimal time of day or even time of week for canvassing to happen? Yeah, when's the best time to be hitting the doors?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about so yeah, when I was canvassing, the number one option is I'm looking to do canvassing all day on Saturday, and then most of the day on Sunday with a later start to factor in brunch and church and things like that. And then weekday evenings is another good time. And actually, actually the weekday evenings are sneaky. They can actually be better than weekends. People can be out and about on weekends, visiting family, going to the beach. So yeah, sometimes you can have can be more effective on the weekdays. So I'd be looking at like 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Kind of depends. Like eight's getting a little late. If it's dark, you don't want to be out canvassing either typically. So, which does get hard in Maine fall and winter when it gets dark at like 4 o'clock. So when the seasons are like that, it's getting dark early. You might not want to be out to 8 o'clock, but 4 to 7 is pretty safe. And then, generally on weekends, I'm going to go out probably no earlier than 10. 10 is a good starting point, and maybe go till 5 o'clock and do multiple shifts. But then on Sundays, I'll probably give myself a later start around 11 or 12.
Yeah, I agree. I think like 8 o'clock is sort of the limit for the last door that I want to hit during the summertime in Maine. Uh, and if you're on the West Coast, you might be able to get away with a little bit later. When you're thinking about efficiency, and like we talked about this at the very beginning of the call, how candidates sometimes just don't know like what their goals should be. What's a realistic number of doors that a candidate should plan on hitting an hour or over a
Hmm.
four hour door knocking shift like the one you just outlined?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would typically assign someone 80 to 100 contacts for a canvas shift for like a 4 hour shift. It's probably high. It's probably more likely to be like 60 knocks in that time. It depends on the canvasser and their level of experience. I was usually able to get at least 20 knocks in an hour, but that can, one conversation that goes long can totally change that. But on average, I would say about, in my experience, maybe 15 to 20 per hour. I'd be curious what your numbers are though.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think in really rural areas, like some of the areas you were talking about before, it goes lower, about 8 to 12. And if you're in a really dense urban area, you might be able to get 20 to 30 in an hour. In Maine, we sometimes joke about there being bike turf because
Yeah, yeah.
we used to go out and take bicycles in between doors or
Oh yeah,
park
no
somebody
joke. We
drive to
literally
you.
did that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Certain
or
areas,
we
take the bike
uh
out.
I remember in 2012 buying Razor scooters for everyone on the canvas. So we were like scooter gang going around
Oh
to be able to make
man,
time in between doors.
I
But
would have
15
got
to
involved
20
earlier if I knew there were scooters.
15 to 20 is definitely on average between the two. And I think, we're going to run a training in 2 weeks from now with Sue Fothergill from Represent Us about how to
Oh
manage
yeah.
volunteers. Um, and a pro tip that I would offer is share these averages with your volunteers when you are rolling out the goals at the beginning of the shift. So say your goal today is to knock 15 to 20 doors an hour and
Hmm.
to knock a total of 100 doors by the end of your shift and have roughly 10 conversations, whatever it ends up being. Set those expectations clearly with people that that's what a productive day looks like, and you'll be surprised the difference that happens in terms of them meeting those metrics or
Hmm.
missing them. If they don't know that that's the standard, they might work a little, a little less hard. So people tend to want to be top of the class, I find, and you got to tell people what the averages are for them to
Yeah,
be able to hit them.
that makes a lot
Um,
of sense. Yeah, and we love Sue. You'll encourage everyone to attend that presentation as well.
yeah, yeah, you guys are in for a treat. She did this training with us last year, and we're excited to have her back to do it again.
Oh, great.
Um,
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about other voter contact methods because we've spent a lot of time talking about door to door. And I know we're approaching the time that we usually throw to the product demo,
Mm.
but beyond door to door, what voter contact methods are you a fan of, especially through the lens that most of our candidates are local candidates who are working with tighter budgets?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different methods, and of course, the money is always a factor. So it's just a few I'll rattle off. In addition to door knocking, of course, you've got phone banking, which is can be uh, fairly inexpensive depending on the systems that you use. Text banking, which because of the volume, tends to be quite a bit more expensive. It's not that it's, maybe 2 or 3 cents to send a text, but when you're sending 200,000 of them, that adds up quickly. You've got mail, direct mail, people do digital ads. I'm a big fan of letters to the editor, doing a letter to the editor campaign, and also tabling events. But with those, you're less targeted. You're just reaching the general public. And so you've really got to pick your locations and your newspaper targets very carefully. But they can have a big return for the time that it takes to invest into the project. Um, and digital outreach, social media, of course. and always looking at ways and find new ways to try to bring people into the movement. And I think recently been doing more like mutual aid, which, a lot of people would say, well, you're not actually doing something that furthers the cause. You're not talking about a candidate or an issue. You're not, necessarily handing out your literature. So how does it further the issue or the candidate? And what it does is it helps you to build relationships and give you a level of credibility and trust when people see that you're out there doing something for the community without expecting anything in return. It has a really big impact.
Mhm. Awesome. And is there anything that you think candidates should know about sort of the hierarchy of voter contact methods? We talked about door sort of being king, but do you have a personal sort of approach to how you layer these?
Ooh, good question. Good question. So door knocking, definitely the best. I find the phone banking is really challenging. I've not had as much success with phone banking, so I'm probably going to put text banking over phone banking. Um, and those with the digital ads too, those can all be targeted, so they're probably the best strategies. And then I might go to like LTEs and tabling after that. Presentations too, have done found that those can be really effective, especially if you have a group like we've been able to present to the Rotary, for example. They have an audience. It's typically a large audience, so there's no preparation that you need to do to get people there. So those kind of things can be effective as well.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that with all of these, there are pluses and minuses to each of the voter contact methods. Door knocking, I think, remains one of the strongest. And I mentioned that I really like pairing door knocking with digital ads. I think one of the things that I like to do is run digital ads because you can geofence them. You can actually make sure, okay, these ads are going to show up in this district. And then people will have seen your name and that you're running for office before you show up at their door knocking. And that can just increase the likelihood that they're going to have a conversation with you because they've heard of your campaign. I really like texting because texting is something that you can do at volume for relatively cheap. Mail is probably more effective than texting, on average, but it's so much more expensive because it has fixed costs associated with it. The printing is what the printing costs. The postage is what the postage costs. So it can be a little bit more expensive. So all of these things, it takes a little bit of weighing what your resources are. If you had all the money in the world, I would definitely say like make sure that you get a couple rounds of mailers out, but I know that's not realistic for every campaign. And so I tend to like a blend of door knocking, texting, and digital ads. And Monica, I see your comment here about trying phone banking with the voter file and it not being terribly accurate. That is an unfortunate truth is these voter files are maintained initially by the state itself. And when someone moves or if they change their phone number, it doesn't get reported. So it underscores the importance of trying to reach the same voter through multiple different touches. And Chris mentioned phone calls can be really hard. For that very reason, we see people change cell phone carriers. We see people change phone numbers more than in the past when everyone had the same landline number for their entire lives. I can call 474-6100 and still reach my old friend Graham Haley's parents, and probably will until the day that they stop having landlines, and that's just not the case anymore.
Other thing to factor in is like instead of trying to think about these things as like a hierarchy or as an individual actions, like they really do need to work in collaboration. And so like, being able to do a round of ads or text messaging before you start your canvassing or phone banking can be really helpful because it gives people a little bit of an introduction to who you are or what issue you stand for before you show up at their door and can so yeah, thinking thinking about it more holistically, I think is important.
Yeah. Um, so I want to be able to give Chris a little bit of a talking break, and I want to bring Tevin on. We're going to wrap up in the last 15 minutes with straight Q&A from the audience, and you can submit a question. Should be a button that says Q&A at the bottom, and it will build a nice little list for us to go through. But I want to introduce Tevin Bell from our product team, who's going to show you a little bit of practically how you can put all of this really good information and wisdom from Chris into action. And then we'll get back into some more questions and answers with Chris. But Tevin, why don't you take it away?
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Hey, everyone. Okay, so we've got a few things to go over that our product does that I think are particularly helpful in terms of voter outreach. So I'll go from kind of the top of what we talked about all the way down to what we've talked about most recently. And I'll start here with your win numbers. So we went through kind of the equation for calculating your win number. And that's one of the things that we offer. What we do is when you select an office, we actually go grab the correct voter file, do some math over it, and lay out exactly how your win number is calculated. You can see here in my test project here, I think I'm running for a mayoral seat in Seattle. So the numbers are particularly high, and you can expect a lot lower, especially with smaller, more local races. But what we do here is take your total voters, we look at the turnout from the previous elections, calculate what you're going to need with that 50% plus one figure. And then we take it a step further and actually convert that into voter contacts. So you can see here, we like to encourage people to go higher on their voter contacts. You're never going to be sad about contacting more voters and winning. So we tend to encourage going a little higher there. And then that all gets rolled up into what we call your campaign progress, where you can track the number of voters that you've contacted versus the number of voter contacts that you need from all of that math. Awesome. Okay, so next one I'm going to do off of some screenshots because it makes everybody's life a lot easier. And that is the campaign plan that we've rolled out this year. We have an 8-week-ish, 8, and then some educational stuff out past 8 weeks from your election. That all is centered around voter contact. So here I'm just hitting 8 weeks to my election day, and I've got some educational stuff that I can do. But then as we get into 7 weeks, you see it's all about knocking on doors to get to know your voters, planning some phone banking if you want to do that, post to social media. And we evolve this strategy as you get closer and closer to your election day so that you are adapting your strategy as time goes on. You can see it's mostly about getting to know your voters here at the beginning. And then it goes into persuading your voters. And we work in a lot of the things we've talked about here. Your scripts for getting to know your voters are probably going to be different than your scripts for persuading voters. Or as you get closer to your election day, maybe here in the last 2 weeks, we start a daily countdown where you start planning your get out the vote. And then as you actually get into a week from your election day, making sure that you're sending out your get out the vote reminders, doing your door knocking for getting out the vote, going to the polls and celebrating your efforts. So yeah, we encourage you all to use this. It's a nice standard campaign plan that works in a lot of the best practices. So if this is your first time or if you're not super familiar with planning field operations, we can handle a lot of the kind of base work and best practices for you. Now, we also always encourage people to go above and beyond this. Like I said earlier, you're never going to be sad about winning your election after you put in more work. Okay, that is the campaign plan. we also talked about how these different kinds of outreach need to work. And one of the main things that we do there is helping you generate all of the content that you might need. If you've never written a social post for a specific purpose, or you're not super familiar with writing texting for your texting campaigns, we have a lot of different content that you can generate. And a lot of this is tied into a lot of those specific campaign plan tasks. So if you're in a task and you're 1 month out, we use this 1 month until election SMS. And really what these do is allow you to much more easily get specific content that works for the different parts of the election cycle that you might be in. Okay. We also have a lot of the different voter targeting mechanisms that we talked about. I won't go in and pull those up so that we're staying on time here, but we work out voter frequency. So if you're looking to hit that 2-on-1 rule where you hit super voters more often than you hit sort of medium voters or lower propensity voters, we've got that in. You can go and cut your voter file so that you're only targeting super voters, or so that you're only targeting first-time voters, depending on what you're trying to do in your strategy. And then, okay, I'll show you a little bit of something that's upcoming. So we focused a lot on this campaign plan and having all of this, but in the interest of going above, or if there's a specific tactic you want to try out during your election, we are currently developing a sort of centralized outreach hub where you can come in here and do any outreach ad hoc. If something happens in your race and you want to get a text out to your district because of a major event that's happened, or responding to an opponent spreading some misinformation or taking control of the conversation in a way that you want to take back, you'll be able to come in here and schedule any of our existing methods of voter contact and launch it all from here outside of your campaign plan, so that you can be more adaptive. And it'll also store a history of things. If you're like me and you tend to forget what happened a week ago or 3 weeks ago, you'll be able to see here, okay, I started with door knocking on this day, I scheduled a text out for this day, and you'll be able to keep all of your voter outreach a little bit more organized in total. I think the last thing that we talked about was doing a lot of these different voter contacts in tandem. So if you're interested in, like we talked about earlier, sending out a text to your district before you go door knocking, so you've got some name recognition, we actually offer our texting at cost. So the average one of you sitting in here probably has a district size of about 5,000. You might be a little bit more, a little bit less. But we do offer our texting for about 3.5 cents a text. So not all that terrible for those of you with smaller districts. If you've got a district of 5,000 and you want to hit half of those, you're looking at under $100. Yeah, I think that about hits everything we talked through, Rob. I'll leave hopefully enough time for some Q&A.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Tevin. And yeah, we didn't get to talk a ton about what goes into an effective script for door knocking, but the good news is that these tools that we have do all that for you, essentially, and it builds off of what you actually enter into your initial onboarding materials. You tell us about what's important to you, and the scripts will help you to put your best foot forward. I want to get into some of the Q&A now as we wrap up in the last 10 minutes or so. I want to lift up one that I saw Chris answer in the chat. Heather had asked what type of printed literature is best for door knocking, and Chris mentioned the small handout. If you can afford to have the hole punched in it so it hangs off of doors easily, I love that. It's not a necessity, but I like door hangers in general rather than something that you have to leave kind of like wedged in between the door if no one's home, because doing lit, a majority of the literature you leave behind is going to be left at the doors where someone didn't get a chance to talk to you. And those door hangers are helpful. The giant caveat that I always make when you're handing out literature, never put it in the mailbox. The only thing that can go in a mailbox is mail with postage on it, and you can get a massive fine for your campaign if you violate that rule. So that is one that I always tell people. I see a question here about any advice for working around college campuses and identifying registered voters instead of talking to the out-of-state folks. So, Chris, I know you've done a ton of college work. And yeah, what's your advice for this? And we had also had a similar question I'm going to bundle here about advice for reaching out to young people with field programs.
Yeah. So I think college campuses can be a great place to organize. They can also be a frustrating place to organize. It's like getting access on campus can be challenging. Students can be busy. The students also like student groups rotate out. So you might build a relationship with some students on campus and have a good thing going, but then the students inevitably graduate, and those can fall apart. But one of the things that I like doing with college organizing is to actually make a voter registration table the primary table, and then my issue as the secondary issue. So like the it's easier to get on campus if you tell the student group or the dean or whoever you've got to contact to get permission that you're doing voter registration. It's a service rather than trying to spread your propaganda. So having that, getting people interested, then you're sort of also weeding out the people who are from another state. You're making sure that the people are registered to vote, and then you can share with them more information about your cause. We've also had some luck, like actually getting into classes to present, as some poli-sci professors will look for content to be able to share with the students. And so you might get the opportunity to actually go in. That doesn't actually help you to narrow out the people who aren't registered to vote, but it does give you a captive audience that can help you to build those relationships.
Awesome. I saw a question from Michael McGinnis, who said local elections for him run only at about 8 to 10% turnout, a little more for the mayor. Do you have any advice for getting various demographics interested enough to vote for the right person in these low turnout environments?
Whew, well, the first thing that comes to mind is what an opportunity there. I mean, and even, some of these school board races go literally uncontested. You just by showing up, you could get into an elected office, and more independents and grassroots candidates need to be taking those opportunities. It really can it's a way to start to take power, to organize, and to inspire the rest of the movement to start to get involved and take action when they see that people are having success. So, the other thing, and we talked about it earlier, is just I think people are hungry for candidates and campaigns that are not corporate funded. So when you were talking about handouts earlier, I was thinking like, you don't want to be too, like, you don't want the thing to be poorly designed and hard to look at and cheap, but you also don't want it to be too fancy. These glossy, like over designed mailers immediately scream corporate funding, and people are more aware of that today than I think they were 10 years ago. So, not taking the big money, making sure that you're, connecting with the community, doing things like mutual aid, providing services to the community, meeting people where they're at. I think that kind of stuff will inspire people. I mean, the bar is so low right now where like trust in our major institutions has totally plummeted. It's in the low teens in most instances. So, just showing up, being honest, authentic, and somewhat intelligent and well-spoken, I think can be a great place to start.
Yeah, I had seen another question from Michael earlier about advice for apartments, and we kind of touched on this about um, being able to get, if you can find that one person who lives in the building to help you. And it made me think back to that college question as well. We used to organize dorm storms, we would call them, and get that one person who is in the dorm and who can get into the dorm and have them do the door knocking for that entire dorm. And they could do it over the course of a week, but try to talk to every single person, leave a piece of literature on every door. And that can be a really good, effective way to organize on campus.
Nice.
And
I'm
it gives you a
totally
good goal
feeling that.
too. Yeah, it gives you a good goal too of, okay, there are 4 different dorms on campus. I need a volunteer from each. How do I find those people? So
Nice. Love that.
Ebony asked earlier, what are your suggestions for field during a primary, and how does that different from a general election?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I've worked mostly with independent and third party candidates that don't have that same focus. But I think it's probably very similar. You know, your audience, your persuadable universe, obviously going to be smaller. So your targeting is going to be more specific. You're going to want to be looking at people who actually turn out to vote in primaries, and depending on the state, you may also be considering if it has an open primary. You may need to be targeting independents and encouraging them to participate. I think, you know, you can also like a field effort on a primary can make a huge impact, because ultimately these field efforts are just trying to get to you know, the GOTV point, where you take all of this effort that you've invested, all the persuasion that you've done, moved people up the ladder. Now you've got to get them to actually turn out and vote. And when those primaries can have such a low voter turnout, it gives you an opportunity to be able to yeah, to sneak in a win, even if you were maybe down 5, 10 points in the polls before the primary. Because turnout varies so much in those primaries, you do have an opportunity to do a good GOTV to get those people to show up and sneak a victory.
Yeah. So this question comes from Casey. Casey asks, what role do debates and town halls play in voter outreach? And are they effective forums or a waste of time?
Yeah, good question. I think debates are so critical, but it's obviously it's hard for independents and candidates outside the major two parties. That there's sort of like some gatekeeping there, where they only let you participate if you have X% of the vote, and that can vary depending on the year and how they're feeling. And I mean, I think it's designed that way to exclude independents from being able to participate. But if you can participate, I think it does give you a real opportunity to have a massive platform that you may not otherwise have. And when we were on the Lisa Savage campaign, we invested heavily into that primary, or into the debate, the first debate we were able to get into, and it was a huge boost for the campaign. We ended up getting some great clips out of it. She stood up on that stage with, you know, these big with Susan Collins and Sarah Gideon, and was, you know, the most intelligent, well-spoken person on that stage. So I do think that there's a big opportunity there. Not super experience with the town hall organizing, but yeah, and I mean these are captive audiences. I think anytime you don't have to plan an event and recruit the audience, and you get to stand in front of people and make your pitch, that's a pretty good return on investment.
Mhm. I see Will Rivera asked, what's the best strategy for when you're mostly working alone on your field plan? And I think I would start with the giant caveat before I let Chris answer this one of the best strategy is to stop working alone. You've got to recruit volunteers. You've got to recruit supporters, and that starts with asking for support. I know that it can feel like you're alone in these efforts, but a campaign to be people powered needs people. And there are a lot of really wonderful ways that you can invite people into your campaign to help with door knocking, to help with tabling, to help with all of these different efforts. And that being said, I am also aware that, like in a small, city council race, in some of these smaller races, there are 1 to 2 man volunteer teams that make up the entire campaign. And in these smaller municipalities, it's not unusual for a candidate to literally knock every door themselves. And it just means that you have to be realistic about how many doors you need to knock a day and how many doors you need to knock over a course of a week, and how early it's going to take for you to be able to make those voter contacts yourself if you are truly doing it all by yourself or with just 1 or 2 people helping you. So a big part of it is knowing that math and knowing what it's going to take, how many conversations you need to have, and whether that's just you doing it alone or a team of 100 volunteers helping you. It starts with knowing the math, Will. But Chris, anything to add on that one?
No, I think that's spot on. I think in places like Maine, you can win a state rep seat with like 5 good volunteers if you're really committed to going out and doing the work. And that means like going and doing the door knocking and talking to your neighbors. Like a small group of people can make a huge difference. And I would agree with you too. Like the first thing you want to do when you're running your field plan is to work on building that capacity. And so you've got to have those one-on-one conversations and turn 1 volunteer into 3 and so forth. But if you were just having to manage the campaign on your own, I mean, another factor is money. If you're alone, but you have a lot of money, you can buy ads. There are a lot of things you can do just as an individual. But if you're going solo, you don't have a ton of money. I mean, I know a guy in Maine who would basically run his own campaign and his own field program, but he would just go out and knock he was just very invested in the door knocking and would go out every single day and made sure to knock on every single door in his district and would write handwritten notes on the cards as he left them. And he's still in the Maine Senate and has been there for a long time. So I do think this highlights the benefit of running a good canvas operation.
Awesome. Well, I want to make a last call for any questions here. And I do want to call attention to the links that Quinn has just posted for you in the chat. First and foremost, you have the opportunity to RSVP for our training, which is all focused on volunteer recruitment and volunteer management. That's going to be 2 weeks from now on Thursday, the 24th. We mentioned that's going to be with Sue Fothergill from Represent Us, a really tremendous organizer. Sorry, I said the 24th, but it's on the 26th. And then also we have a link to our Circle community. This is our online community. It's over 1,000 candidates who are working together to elevate each other's campaigns. There are amazing opportunities to earn free text messages, free yard signs, free access to a ton of different tools by participating in this community. We have courses if you prefer to do your training as sort of a self-serve. We have a course on how to run and win a campaign that breaks down campaigning into its 4 different phases, starting with launching, awareness, voter contact, and get out the vote. It goes into depth even more on field work. And we also have courses for volunteers to level up their skill set, and even courses for elected officials. Walk you through, okay, you've been elected, now what do you do? How do you make moves in your first 100 days? How do you keep your integrity? How do you achieve your promises that you made to your elected officials? So Circle's a great place. It's where we collected a lot of the questions ahead of time that we wanted to ask Chris. So I really hope that we will see you all there. And seeing no final questions here, yeah, I want to thank Chris again. You've been really generous with your expertise, and I want to thank everybody for asking such great questions. The questions, like I said, are my favorite part of this. So round of applause for Chris, and any final thoughts before we break the call? All right. Well,
Well,
folks,
I just want to say real quick, Rob, thank you all so much for the invite. I love Good Party. I love what you're doing. You got a great vibe. You got a great logo. You got a great mission. I'm encouraging all independent and third-party candidates to use your tools. I appreciate this opportunity, and I also would encourage people, if you're interested in the money, getting money out of politics, to check out AmericanPromise.net. Keep up your great work, everybody here. Good luck in your elections, and thanks again for the opportunity.
yeah, thank you, everyone. And we will be posting the recording of this tomorrow in Circle. So folks, if there are pieces of this that you want to go back over and insights that you want to pull out, by all means, log into Circle. It'll be under GPA, Good Party Academy Live recordings. And I'll answer if there are additional questions that people have over the course of the next week. I'll try to answer those in the comment section of the training.